Alright, so in this podcast, we will discuss who John Brown is and what he is known for. So, basically, John Brown, he was a guy who wanted to put an end to slavery. He hated slavery so much. He wanted to help the slaves to become free and get them out of the plantations and basically get them to the north where they could be safe. He was raised in an anti-slavery home and was told it was a sin to God to have slaves. So his parents taught him to hate slavery, basically.
Yeah. And he was basically the one who essentially made a spark in the start of the Civil War. And back then, when the Civil War was going on, America was much more smaller than it is today because other countries owned bits of the United States before the United States became what it is today.
Like the whole western part of the country, the present country, wasn't there. Alright, so like the southern states, like Georgia and Florida, Alabama, and like Mississippi, those states were pro-slavery, so they supported slavery. They were the ones who wanted to have slaves. Well, slaves were very expensive, so the average person couldn't afford a slave. So,
and I look at buying slaves like buying a stock. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but this is because I think it's buying a stock because it can vary in the cost of the slave of the health and other things like diseases and stuff that's going to affect their ability to work. It's like a stock. The price can go up and down. And
yeah.
No. Oh, okay.
And do you think he was trying to be peaceful whenever he was trying to start trying to free the slaves or trying to start the war?
Well, I think he wanted to be heard. He wanted people to hear him about his opinion on slavery. So he did things that weren't peaceful, and he ended up killing a lot of people in the process. And he basically did start a whole war.
Yeah. And also he tried being peaceful, but then as you said, he wanted to be heard, so that could have also led to things he did, like the killing of the other people.
One big attack he led was in present-day Lawrence, Kansas. It's just west of Kansas City, basically. He basically he took 5 pro-slavery men from their homes and hit them and took their lives during the attack. He beat them to death, basically.
And this attack is called the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre. Also, the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre was an opening shot to the Civil War in Bleeding, Kansas.
Bleeding, Kansas? Well, it's basically the violence in the sectional conflict in the American Midwest and in the late 1850s, basically, when Nebraska and Kansas became states, they got the opportunity to decide if they wanted slavery or not. So it was right in the middle of things.
In referring to Bleeding, Kansas, or the Border War, which is another name for Bleeding, Kansas, Bleeding, Kansas was a very significant event in American history. The Battle of Osawatomie took place on August 30th, 1856, when pro-slavery forces led by John Reed, who shot John Brown's son and killed him.
John Brown, he received a heads up that pro-slavery forces were coming to the town. So basically he got a whole bunch of people and he made a small fighting force to protect the town and its people, but his son still was killed. in the battle, like you said.
Yeah. And about 30 Free Staters were killed, including Frederick, John Brown's other son. Another raid led by John Brown was the attack on Harper's Ferry.
This is one of like the most well-known attacks, I would say. Harper's Ferry was like a military armory that the military used to store their supplies, so they stored guns and ammunition. And John Brown had a plan to raid the armory and get guns to give to the slaves so they could fight and basically start a rebellion.
Yeah, and then John Brown ended up taking his men and some hostages into the firing house and held them there. But a couple of hours later, his troop figured out where he was and all his men and hostages. And so they arrived at train and surrounded John Brown and his men and ended up killing a couple of his men, and two of them tried swimming across the river, but then they ended up getting gunned down by the troopers that were sent over to John Brown, and then they took John Brown in, and he was sentenced to death, essentially.
All right, so it all comes down to this. What do you think? Do you think John Brown was a martyr or a murderer?
Well, I think John Brown was a murderer because he once took 5 men from their home and beat them to death. And I think he could have done it more peacefully and less violent, like having less people get killed and stuff like that. I feel like it was not necessary for him to take the 5 men out of their homes. But I do think what John Brown was trying to do was a good thing, like trying to flee the slaves and stuff and end it. But he could have done it more civilly. What do you think?
Well, I would have to agree with what you said earlier. Like, he killed people who were trying to defend the country that he lives in. And, like, he tried to help the slaves, but it just didn't work out. He was raised to hate slavery, but it wasn't peaceful.
Yeah. I can also see why some people think John Brown might have been a martyr, because he was trying to do a good thing and help out the slaves become free, but like, as I said, he did start like some of the Civil War and going back up. He kind of did put the hostages' lives in danger and his men that he took and hid them in the firing house, because most of his men did lose their lives that day.
Yeah, and he did kill innocent people.
Yeah.
He didn't know if they supported slavery or not. Like, they could have been on his side. So.
But I also understand where some of this frustration could come from, like of him wanting to kill the people, because they weren't really treating the slaves right, and he was raised around as you said back earlier, that he was raised in the house with like anti-slavery parents and stuff, and he was taught that it was a sin, and so he could have just completely just hated the people who did that.
But with this information that we have gotten, we think John Brown was a murderer just because of like everything he did in general. Well, thank you for listening.